So you might remember that journalist John O. Sullivan coined the phrase manifest destiny to describe America's God-given right to take over all the land between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, regardless of who happened to be living. When Mexico became independent, there were only about 2,000 Tejanos there, so to encourage economic development, Mexico's government granted a huge tract of land to Moses Austin. Austin's son Stephen made a tidy profit selling off smaller parcels of that land until there were 7,000 Americans there. This made Mexico nervous, so backpedaling furiously, Mexico annulled the land contracts and banned further emigration into Texas. Even though slavery was already abolished in Mexico, up to now they had allowed Americans to bring slaves. Austin, joined by some Tejano elites, demanded greater autonomy and the right to use slave labor. Thinking the better of it, Mexican General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna decided to assert control over the rest of territory with an army, turning the elite's demands for autonomy into a full-scale revolt for independence. On March 13, 1836, Santa Anna defeated the American defenders of the Alamo, killing 187, or 188, sources differ, Americans, including Davy Crockett. The Texas rebels would remember the Alamo and come back to defeat Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto, and Mexico was forced to recognize Texas's independence. So Texas became the Lone Star Republic and quickly decided that it would be much better to be a less lonely star and join the United States. So in 1837, Texas's Congress called for union, but all they heard back was, "Not so fast, Texas." Why? Because Texas wanted to be a slave state, and adding another slave state would disrupt the balance in the Senate. So Jackson and Van Buren did what good politicians always do. They ignored Texas. And then, after Martin Van Buren wrote a letter denouncing any plan to annex Texas on the grounds that it would probably provoke a war, Democratic Convention Southerners threw their support behind slave-holding Andrew Jackson pal, James K. Polk. Polk just managed to get a presidential victory over perennial almost President Henry Clay, and seeing the writing on the wall, Congress annexed Texas in March of 1845, days before Polk took office. Congress then forged an agreement with Britain to divide Oregon at the 49th parallel, which restored the slave state-free state balance in the Senate. The land-hungry James K. Polk had another goal as president: acquire California from Mexico. He tried to purchase it from Mexico, but they were like, no, which is Spanish for no. So Polk decided to do things the hard way. He sent troops under future President Zachary Taylor into this disputed border region. So Santa Anna's army was defeated in February 1847, but Mexico refused to give up. So Winfield Scott, who had the unfortunate nickname Old Fuss and Feathers, captured Mexico City itself in September. A final peace treaty, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, was signed in 1848, under which Mexico confirmed the annexation of Texas and further ceded California, as well as several other places that would later become states, but we couldn't fit on the map. After the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, between 75,000 and 100,000 Spanish-speaking Mexicans and 150,000 Native Americans were under the jurisdiction of the United States. Despite the fact that the treaty granted Spanish-descended Mexican male citizens legal and property rights, the Mexicans were still seen as inferior to Anglo-Saxons, whose manifest destiny it was, of course, to overspread the continent. And the fact that these Mexicans were Catholic didn't help either, especially because in the eastern part of the United States, there was a rising tide of anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant sentiment known as nativism. And there was a new political party, the American Party, dedicated entirely to such sentiment. They were referred to as the Know-Nothings, because when you asked them about their politics, they would answer that they didn't know anything. And indeed, they didn't. A new Free Soil Party formed in 1848, calling for the limiting of slavery's expansion in the West so that it could be open for white people to live and work. So in 1850, when California finally did ask to be admitted into the Union, it was as a free state. Southerners freaked out because they saw it as the beginning of the end of slavery. But then, to the rescue came Henry Clay for his last hurrah. He said, "We can kick this problem down the road once more," and brokered a four-part plan that became known rather anticlimactically as the Compromise of 1850. Historians, can you name nothing? The 4 points were: 1, California would be admitted as a free state; 2, the slave trade, but not slavery, would be outlawed in Washington, D.C.; 3, a new super harsh fugitive slave law would be enacted; and 4, popular sovereignty.